This podcast was first recorded for the inaugural Brilliance Summit in 2024.
Welcome to the Brilliance Summit Podcast. I am so excited to present this to you. My name is Madeline McQueen, creator of the summit, CEO of Magnificently You, and a multi-award winning executive coach, speaker, and trainer. Now, this podcast is your pre-event content, available only to attendees, sponsors, partners, and exhibitors. You see, your Brilliant Summit experience starts right here and right now. We don't have to wait until the 27th of June to gain that learning and our joy. Oh no. Here we have a podcast series featuring amazing female leaders sharing their knowledge, experience, and their how-tos. This week's podcast guest is Pamela Zaballa. She is the CEO of KnowMore.org, and we are talking behind closed doors, the truth about domestic abuse and corporate, and where to find support. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Brilliance Summit Podcast. I'm super pumped to have one of my favorite people on our podcast today. Her name is Pamela Zaballa, and she's the CEO of KnowMore. Welcome, Pamela. Please do introduce yourself.
Well, as you said, I'm the CEO of the KnowMore Foundation that is dedicated to preventing gender-based violence globally. So we kind of focus more on education, advocacy, and just making sure we can get our messaging out there very clearly that, gender-based violence in any way, shape, or form is not acceptable.
Okay, great. I think you haven't told us all the things about you and the fact that you've been in this work for quite some time and definitely are spearheading change and impact, especially also with quite a lot of global organizations. So yeah, I have to give you your flowers, Pamela. I have to give you your flowers.
Thank you for that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Over 20 years doing the same thing and loving it. And I can't see not doing it. So that is, I find that amazing, actually.
No, it's great. So this week's podcast is all about how to find the truth about domestic violence and sexual assault and corporate. Like, we almost assume it doesn't happen for people in corporate, like that couldn't possibly be their lives. But it's also about where to find the help that you need when you need it. And we're all happy to have difficult conversations if it means that we can help save another victim. So my first question to you, Pamela, is one that we ask everybody. So what does brilliance mean to you?
It's such an interesting question. For me, brilliance, and it could be because of what I do, but it does mean grabbing your talents and infusing them with, a passion. What is your passion? What moves you, right? Because that's the best way to get your talents to show. And that's then the only way that you really become brilliant, right? You shine on other people. People see what you do and they're excited because they either want to do what you do or you're actually showing them the way of how to do that. So yeah, once you become, you're this shining model of brilliance because you've grabbed your talents, you've infused passion, you're also a mirror for other people and a pathway for others. And I think that's when you start demonstrating that you're truly brilliant.
That really makes me think of the Marianne Williamson quote, that when you shine, you allow other people to shine too, or you give them permission to shine too. I love that. So this work that you do, what got you into this work, which is about, supporting people, or should I say, really having a movement around ending domestic violence and sexual violence?
it's interesting. I have a good friend who's publishing a book about activism, and she says in that book that what moves activism is something that breaks your heart. If you
Right.
find something that breaks your heart, you're more likely then to really feel passion and and activate into that. In my case, not being a survivor, I found myself with 20 years, I believe, working in a women's prison. And the interesting part of that story was I wasn't there in any gender-based violence kind of related issue. I was there in a food program, in allotments, they were doing garden stuff, and it just came through their stories, Madeline, that
Mm,
each one of them, many of them were there because, of an abusive relationship, but all of them had been affected by that. And I that it broke my heart to see women that otherwise wouldn't be there, that were not with their children at that moment. And just to kind of tell you what the push of that was, my first big job was in Manhattan Family Court. And that was a melting pot of cases. And what that did for me, Madeline, was to show that this issue happened to everybody. So it wasn't
yeah.
about those women in that prison in Honduras, which you might say, well, maybe that's the kind of people that this happens to. It
Mm,
was it was the supermodel against the stockbroker. It was people from every religion, class, background, education level. And I think just seeing I had 80 cases at any given moment. So it just seeing the mix and just the fact that this happened to everybody despite where they were coming from was really the catalyst that, um took me has left me, as a life's work. But exactly by the reason that Tracy says, it broke my heart.
yeah, I really hear that. I think there's this assumption, and I never knew that story, funnily enough, and I've known you for a long time. But I think there's assumption that it's only a certain type of person that this happens to,
Mhm.
uh, and a certain kind of class. And I think that that is a real misnomer. And it kind of makes me just think about, if you think about your line of work and what you have done, you've worked with the UN, you've worked with Commonwealth, you've worked with huge companies like Uber, um, the Vodafone Foundation, all of these different kinds of organizations, the Match Group, and more, some really big banks that we've worked with as well. Is what do you think is if there was one, when you look at these women who have gone through these experiences, what's the common denominator? Is there a common denominator? Is there something that we should look out for when we see when we're working with other women in this and considering this area?
The common thing those women have are perpetrators of abuse.
Mm,
Um, and what I'm telling you with that is that these women come from all levels, and in a company it could be the one of the most senior levels. We've had major donors who are heiresses, right, where money was not. We've had actresses that you've seen that supported our cause, right, who are with actors in the height of their game, and this is happening too. So from our point of view, that's what they have in common.
mhm,
Now, if you are working in a company, and how can you tell if somebody's going through that? Is another question. And I always think that we just need to be informed that
mm,
what is domestic abuse, and what is sexual harassment too, because talking in companies, obviously you can see both things. But in terms of domestic abuse, what are the signs, right? If you have a colleague who never talks to anybody, keeps to herself, maybe one day you saw something that you felt was like a black and blue, but you couldn't tell because it had makeup. Or maybe one day she disclosed that her husband didn't allow her to do this. Um,
mm,
I, I feel that with survivors, it drips sometimes. Information
Yeah.
drips little by little. And so it's kind of your job as an informed individual to put A plus B plus C together and start thinking, oh, this person might be going through the situation.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Yeah, I like that you say drips. I call it seeps. People seep out information. And so when we're thinking about this, I mean, I suppose one of the challenges is for you as an individual to recognize that you are a victim of domestic abuse, sexual violence is, what do you think stops people identifying or going, this is what I'm going through?
I think it's a very complex situation uh, because you go into a relationship with your best faith that the relationship will work. And the way that the abuse is perpetrated, and we know many perpetrators are narcissists too. So I think we need to open the conversation about how that work and how those personalities affect. And so you have this first phase, Madeline, which is, you know, especially if it's a narcissist perpetrator you have here, they're charming, they're amazing, they know the social cues to read you and to give you what you want. So you start falling into their trap of adoring them.
Yeah.
Because once that transfer of care and compassion from you to them, which they translate into self centeredness, I am the most important person in somebody's world, then you start kind of getting into the hook. So I think this first phase is very difficult it's very interesting for people to understand. And this can happen to anybody, especially because we have many perpetrators. We have to kind of just be open about it. They are so charming that your family starts loving them probably a
Yeah.
little bit more than they love you, right?
Yes.
You're
Yes.
the ideal son-in-law that comes in and grabs your mother and cherish her and etc. Right? Because they know what they're doing and they know how to make your world smaller and smaller to ensure that you at the end are so broken and
Mm,
so undermined that you're in it. It does not matter if you are the CEO of a company or if you are, on the bottom spectrum of a company.
yeah, yeah. And I think there's something about that systemic way that somebody operates in the breakdown. I remember a little while back, I think it was Oprah, that kind of, I just remember coming up with like 10 things to look for when you're thinking about, a narcissist or somebody who is a perpetrator, or the two together. And I suppose from your point of view, and obviously, I know that you're kind of on the other end often, but are there specific things? They are super charming. There's no two ways about that. But are there specific things that you would say from your work and your experience to look out for when, when you're engaging with someone?
I think if it's too good to be true,
Mm,
think about it in life. That's a general rule, not only for your romantic kind of relationships. If somebody starts being too into you too quickly,
the love bombing.
the love bombing, right? That is, when somebody gives to you their love, they are in a way giving you power over
Mm,
you. So it's something that is not done lightly,
yes.
right? I know we have a whole framework where we believe on, romantic films that things happening in one day and you feel something the next day, but the
Yeah.
reality is not like that, right? So if somebody all of a sudden is giving you so much power, so you have so much, in a way, you make them so enthusiastic too quickly, then there
Yeah.
is something there that probably doesn't balance right. Then the second thing is, the relationship starts shifting into making comments, little comments about how you're dressed, how you're looking. The manipulation starts. and about your family members, about your friends. Have you ever dealt your friends in your life, and only because this person that just appeared in your life is telling you that your friend is a bit iffy, is she? Like, you have to start trying to see, am I being manipulated? Of course, this is done very, very slowly. And once you feel somebody has, a bit more of control over you, and this is where I say that the best thing that we can do, Madeline, is educate ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Educate ourselves about these personalities. When we're starting relationships, start questioning some of the bits so we don't walk all the pathway and we can only say, oh, we went out with somebody who was a bit controlling, and once I felt control, I left them.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Because then you had a bad experience, but it didn't end up being a marriage or a person that you have children with, or getting into physical abuse that is more difficult to handle for sure.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think it's the subtle things. And I think the other thing, in all honesty, is sometimes definitely the education piece. And there's something here about trusting your own intuition. Like we do, most people, like if you have a conversation with them later on, whether it's domestic abuse or emotional abuse, financial abuse, there would have been a something, not because it's their fault that they ignored, it's because they're bombarded. You almost like are bombarded so much that you can't even trust yourself because it's so at you. And I think I think especially for women, is encouraging us to trust our own guts.
And I would add to that is crucial. Also, trust the gut of some people around you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I know we might all have, difficult relationship with our sisters, with our mothers.
Even
We
with
might
friends
even
at
come
times.
from, we might even come with relationships with our mother is, so difficult. She might be a narcissist herself, or we might come from environments that are difficult. But in general, you will always have some people that are good for you. And if they get suspicious about somebody you're dating, then take that into account. Trust your gut and trust other people's gut too.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. There's often a friend who's saying, I'm not sure about this one. I'm not sure.
Madeline, Madeline, there's also something that, I know that you and the work that you do is you set out your life plan, right? You work forward. And what I see many times is, I'm going to say women because that's what I see the most, but maybe also men, I have to say in this one. I see that people start getting very desperate at some point in their life. And
Yes.
what they do, because maybe there's not a great life plan, or I'm not meeting my life plan, or so forth. And what you have as a result is conceding.
Yes.
He's a little bit controlling on this, but I can live with that because, I'm 38 and I really want to get married now and I really want to have children.
Yes, and it's getting too late if I don't do it now.
Right. So I think understanding your own value at all given moments is very important. And we know as a fact that perpetrators, when they, we support this podcast, fantastic podcast called The Girlfriends. And it's great because this man went out with 5 women. The ones that had more value on themselves and were a bit harder with him, he had a completely different way of dealing with them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's very important. You will, if you are so confident on yourself, you might scare some of these people away too.
Well, I think that, there are times when we are vulnerable. And again, like you said, depending on what stage in our life at, where we've got to, what we've achieved, what we've even been through. And so, yeah, just being really conscious. And that's why the personal development thing for me is so important, because the more you get to know you and the education, that's so, I can't stress that. And then you pick up on some of these things, and then you can trust yourself. And as you say, trust the friends around you who are saying, not sure about that. And that takes me to corporate really. And, you know, what more? Because I think there is, like you said, this education piece. And as we spoke the other day, in, No More Week and at the No More conference, just about how important awareness is. What do you think corporate organizations can do better in order for their staff to, what can they do to help staff to just everybody be better equipped?
I think corporations have a pivotal societal role to, end gender-based violence completely. And I say that because they have a huge voice. A voice, I always say, it doesn't matter if all the NGOs of the world grab their hands together, we could never outbeat a post from Facebook, you
Right.
know, we know a post from TikTok, never, right?
Yes.
They have, and if you think about it, they have so much engagement from people who buy their product, and they have so many opportunities to get to the public that is important. So coming to the staff side, right? It starts internally for a
Yes.
company, that process. They have to look internally at what they do. Do they even have a policy? And it's very important not to just have policy for policy's sakes.
Mm,
Gender-based violence, which means domestic and sexual violence policy, needs to have like very good senior leadership support. If
mm,
you don't have a senior leadership, at least one person who's really buying in will be your big champion on this policy, what will happen is it'll be really hard to make it really effective. And
yes.
you don't want just to have a policy that sits in the book. You need to make sure their domestic violence policy is alive at all time. And what does this mean? It means keep talking about the subject. Make sure you mark important dates, important activism moments. Make sure that people are aware in the company that it exists because they've seen it in a payslip. They've seen it in the newsletter. There's talk about domestic abuse. There is one survivor from the company that decides to say, I have been a survivor, so there's a story. And by doing all of this, you just keep that notion, that
Yeah.
momentum, that domestic violence is important for the company. You can take a step forward, like many companies are doing now, creating domestic violence champions within the company. And once you do, then you also do it externally. So you use your comms externally. You do a domestic violence campaign on IWD Day or on November the 25th, for example. Then you're telling your staff, this is so serious that
Yes.
my company has gone externally with this. So
Yeah.
if I report, because
Yeah.
remember, right, we were talking about sips and drips. It
Yes.
it doesn't it for a survivor, it's not just one moment that is like, oh, I realized I'm abused, I'm leaving tomorrow.
Yes.
It
It does not work like that.
no, people realize that this is happening, and then they start planning what it could be, and even if they want to leave the relationship or not. So it could be that because of that flow of information and reminding, you're actually helping somebody to make a decision to leave an abusive partner. So making sure the policy is alive is usually my, you know, strongest suggestion to our company.
Mm. It's really funny that it's made me think about, just because, I know we talk about victims, but it has actually made me think about perpetrators.
Mm,
Because when an organization is talking about this and saying how unacceptable, they're educating people about the signs, educating people about, what is and is not acceptable, educating people about where they can go, then what happens is perpetrators are also hearing this information.
mhm,
It's pricking consciousness for them about behaviors.
mhm,
So I think that education piece is super important. And so you've spoken about the policy, and having a policy that lives, a living policy, a breathing policy, a policy that speaks, as opposed to one, like you said, sits in a dusty cabinet. What other resources could the organization be sharing that could make a really big difference? Or that, obviously we're talking about women in leadership and emerging leadership, that those women could either have access to, share with their teams, even for themselves. What resources would you signpost in this area?
So I always advise, companies, especially when talking about this topic, to, look for partners,
Mhm.
specialist partners. Organizations like ours, for example, we have a global directory on domestic and sexual violence called nomoredirectory.org, where wherever you are, you can find, assistance. So it's a great way to say, I hear you, and let's try to get help for you. It does not matter where you are. So I think I recommend that.
We can't wait to meet you at the Brilliance Summit, and we're so glad that you chose you and booked your ticket to ensure that you could experience not just the day, but everything that comes with it, including this podcast. Now, since you knew it was a good thing for you, we're wondering if you recognize it's a good thing for other women too. So please, take the time out to invite the women you know who would truly benefit from a day like the Brilliance Summit and this podcast. We can't wait to see you there.
We also have something like an ERG toolkit for activism. So if a company wants to do what I'm saying, trying to keep a policy alive, these are ideas and examples from a bake sale. Again, you put a bake sale, it's not the money sometimes that you're gonna lift for any charity, but it's just saying this is important and we are seeing you. Because of course, Madeline, if there are so many victims, there are perpetrators from the company.
Absolutely.
Usually lots too. Like, let's almost say that, for the same number, the same thing. So many companies, the ones that are more upfront right now with their domestic violence policy and more experience, are actually looking at what they can do with perpetrators, moving from only zero tolerance to actually you don't live the values of the company, and therefore this can be something for which we can let you go. So, and what does that do? I mean, what it does is exactly what you were suggesting. It starts making any potential perpetrator to think about the consequences of what you're doing. I know we have been saying for years that domestic violence is a crime, and that doesn't seem to be enough. So, maybe here in the livelihood, that is important. So those are some resources. There are also some fantastic networks. I always recommend people, that I sit as a board member for the Employers Initiative Against Domestic Abuse. It's a network where companies get together to talk about this topic. No More is also starting to support a network in the United States. So finding a network where it could be your HR team or your policy person just goes and hears other companies to see what they're doing is also very important.
Okay, great. I mean, there are, and I think the most important message is there is support. There is, there are places to go. I love the global directory. I think the No More Global Directory I think, is a no-brainer. I think every organization should have that, a link to that on their intranet and internet in order for, or sorry, the intranet and their website, should I say, in order for one, that commitment, and two, staff can get to it either way they want to get to it. And then the other question on this for me is, what happens? I'm in an organization that, and I am experiencing this, but from somebody within the organization. What do we do? How do you deal with that?
Of course, we moving to the sexual harassment conversation, it is very important for everybody to understand what sexual harassment is in the company, to understand that, if anybody's making advances of a sexual nature or suggestions for you, this can constitute sexual harassment. That is very important. The next step is not undermining what's happening as something that it happens. So you can't say, oh, actors always flirt with, the coffee girl in a set.
Yeah.
No, right? Those because sexual harassment is an issue. Usually their power is involved.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and people kind of ask me sometimes, Pamela, but what if I'm dating somebody in my company? I would always say, what is your relationship of power, right?
Yeah.
Because, one thing is a CEO dating, the intern, and another thing is to colleagues, right? And is this very consensual? Both are you very happy? And many times you recommend people to go to HR and tell somebody, you know what, I am dating John from
Yeah.
IT, and just for you to know, and this is all, we're all very happy. Now, if you feel that, you're getting advances, the most important thing is to document those. Start writing it. We forget. If you don't write things, you forget them. And, you're likely to have to build some kind of case.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that is important. Even if you don't think that it merits it, write it. Because
Yeah.
there will be a moment where you think, well, this is not just flirting. He tried to grab me by the arm, or he tried to grab me, around somewhere. And then you are gonna make that decision, which is yours. And this is why I'm not saying just
Yeah.
run in the first instance to HR, right? And do talk to somebody there, even if you don't feel they're gonna believe you or anything, you have to do it. Because if the situation gets out of hand, you have to be able to say that you have gone to HR, that you have told them all of this, and
Yeah.
that they didn't listen too, because that might be another level of being complicit with it. So I think, to be fair, more and more companies are taking this more and more seriously.
Mm.
Um, but it is important to, and if you have somebody in your office that you trust, it's not a bad idea also to tell them. The
Yes.
reason is because you have then somebody else who's seeing it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And I also always advise everybody to keep your eyes like open to this. I remember, being in a place where you could tell that every time a girl went to the kitchen, to the cooler, to the photocopier, this guy would stand up immediately and go behind her.
Yeah.
We're seeing it. I had to go to her and say, "Are you okay? We
Yes.
can see this
Yes.
literally." I was in a more senior position than her, so I had the ability of saying, "I see it.
Yes.
Is it? Are you happy with it? Maybe you're happy that every time that
Yes.
you stand
Yes.
up, he stands up, but your business. But are you?" So let's just make sure that we all keep our eyes open to things that might be happening around us.
A question for you on that one. Was she? Like you started the story, you can't leave us hanging. Was she okay with it?
No, 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 she wasn't, but she hadn't started to recognize that this was happening.
Right.
So it was, you know, at that point I got involved. I had a conversation with his line manager. I think he got told. And then the situation de-escalated.
Right.
Nothing
Right.
happened, and it didn't ever involve him, going somewhere. I mean, he was in that story, he was trying it, right? He was trying to get her attention. He
Yeah.
hadn't moved into something. We don't know if he would have ever moved into something else,
Yes. Yeah.
but it was obvious, Madeline, that he was
Yeah.
trying his very best. And that is harassment.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a really important point that you've just made as well about how complicit we can be
Hmm.
with our silence.
Oh,
Like
God.
we see and don't say. Um, I'd love you to talk to that.
Oh, God, yes. I mean, in that particular case, it was almost becoming a running joke in another
Right.
table.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how I saw it the first time, because I heard somebody mumbling, "Oh my God, he stands up every time." And, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Like, no, no, ha ha ha. This is serious. What are you talking, about? So those things, because they're not happening to you, they're not a joke. People never like to be harassed. So there's this kind of myth that goes around that says, "Oh, some girls just enjoy the attention."
Mm,
People don't enjoy unwanted attention.
yes. Yeah.
And therefore, and it doesn't mean that somebody has the ability to be, on your case all the time, right? That's not the behavior that you want also from a colleague, in the
Yes.
sense. So you might be attention seeker, but it doesn't mean that somebody's standing up and following you all over the place, right? You have to be really, really careful. So we are in domestic abuse and sexual harassment, bystanders tend to be a part of it, a very complicit part of it. There was a study around domestic abuse and families, how families were complicit because they didn't want to admit that they had a family member whose relationship was failing.
I think it's so important. And I think that part about power dynamics, you know, and understanding, no, if you are this senior coming after this person, or, you know, there is there is a power dynamic issue here. And even just if you're a, you know, a certain guy of a certain, it doesn't matter the size really, but you know, if you're constantly in my space, not giving me space, there's a power dynamic that's here. And again, you know, being able to, you know, obviously last year, over the last few years, you've had a campaign called Join the Chorus. And actually, when I asked you to speak to that, you know, just about why join the chorus, what was that about? What is that about?
Join the Chorus was a campaign that was developed with the Commonwealth and the fantastic Gentle Forces. So I'm going to give a big shout here to Dani Mohammed, which I know you know well, and you connected us, and that's why we had that campaign. And it just brings everybody to say that they're part of this kind of big collective, that we all have a role to play in gender-based violence, from the way that we educate our children, from the way that we make sure that we learn about these issues, that we don't tolerate them, that we are able to criticize governments that don't want to do anything about it. I always say that gender-based violence is a political issue. It's political because there's just not the resolve to look for proper ways to end it, right? Like, like you did in the pandemic, for example. But it actually takes so many lives, and it just costs so much to the society in general, and it costs a lot to companies. And this is the other bit with companies, Madeline. Victims have a cost for companies, but it's been demonstrated in some studies that perpetrators cost more. And that is very interesting. The time they take on rumination, on stalking, on it is out of the league. So it is very important that companies deal with this issue.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I never ever thought about it from the amount of time they were taking using during their working time to stalk a person, you know, keep checking in on, or even not just, you know, like even from a wife partner point of view, you know, they keep checking in on them, sending them out, where are you? Following them, you know, on you know, find my friend on their phones, you know, all of those things. That's time they should be working, that they're spending doing this.
And if they think that this has happened, then imagine they're already not concentrating on work.
Yes.
One of the biggest studies was done in Argentina with delivery drivers. And the amount of deliveries that were getting late,
right,
the amount of, the trucks, the gas they were spending, literally stocking, some of the victims, it was, out of order. And so basically in that company, they were losing more with the perpetrator side than they were actually losing by women claiming time off, because what happens with the survivor many times is that they don't want to show that they're going through this.
Yes.
They'll make up, they'll go, even if their attention is not there fully, they want to, they want still to make sure that
they're still going to turn up, but also work, inverted commas, may be the safe place. So I'm going to go to work, and getting on with my work may be a way for me to get it off of my head. Whereas a perpetrator might want to get out of work so that they can continue to stalk. So, okay, so we're coming to the end, and I have a few more questions for you. I think there's so much more in this conversation, but I think it's important that we are having the conversation and that we are raising the profile. So, how can we, I mean, you've mentioned a couple of things, but how can we as individuals be better allies to those victims, how can we join the chorus? What is it? What are the things that we could do? Even if I'm not going through it, or maybe I've been through it and whatever. How do we join the chorus?
I think there's two kind of big things. One is the way that you respond to victims. And I think on top of all of this, you need to be really aware of the issue. You need to know what domestic violence is, what it looks like, and why people don't leave a relationship. And because you're likely to come across somebody, and I always say that that person, you might be the first person that this survivor is deciding to disclose. And there we use this recognize the issue, and you can only recognize something that you know about it. This is why learning is important. You need to be able to respond to them, with assertiveness, like I believe you, and just make that person feel like they're credible, like and like they're enough, like this is happening to them and they shouldn't be happening to them, and then refer them somewhere where they can get specialist support. So this is, in a way, one of the areas just to be prepared to know what to do if you ever confront this.
Yeah.
In terms of the bigger work, I would say raise your voice whenever you're seeing activism moments of this happening. Just share it. You are likely to know somebody who has gone through domestic violence. This is for sure, or sexual assault. It is. I almost never have heard anybody that says I don't know anybody who hasn't gone through both. And if we're a woman, we're always scared about sexual assault. This is the way the society is being built, and we know so many cases of domestic abuse.
Yeah.
So it's not an issue that happens to few. We know it's 1 in 3 women and around 1 in 6 men. So do elevate your voice, do champion causes that support the end of this, and do whatever you can to make sure that your government, wherever you are, also takes this issue very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And yes, and we have so many issues with, gender inequality. And understanding gender inequality is important because I'm one of your believer that if the majority of, men, for example, were the ones that this happened to, maybe we would have progressed more on an answer for it. I know. They always say this, right? If women had all the solutions for this issue, we probably would have solved it by now. So it's also, making sure that if you're a man, join your voice.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a sister, a family member, you don't want this to happen to your daughters, let's try to work for a society that doesn't have this.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brilliant. There's something you said just about, believe the victim. And I think one thing is it doesn't matter about your relationship with the perpetrator. That's not what's important. And I think sometimes, and I even across, whether this is race, LGBTQ plus, disability, gender-based violence, gender-based abuse, is I think it's very easy for people to go, oh, I know him, he's fine, or I know her. That no, I've never got that from it. And it's like, but it's not about your experience with that person. They're completely different with you. It's about the victim's experience with that person. I think that's a really important thing for us to remember. So
sorry, I just wanted to say that I love that you're talking about this in the Brilliance Summit, because I feel that in domestic abuse and also in sexual harassment, you have somebody who's trying to rob you of your brilliance.
Yes, it's so true.
They're making an assault on your brilliance. It is harder to be the best version of what you can be when you have an abuser beside you.
It is so true, because your brilliance is an offense to them. And so they go out of their way to reduce it to nothing. So you no longer shine and you are completely dependent on them. and then they cast you away while still holding on to you.
Because what they want to do, they always will want to feel better than you. So your
Absolutely.
brilliance hurts them. It goes to that center point that they have of incredible low self-esteem and all sorts of excuses.
Yes,
So they will make
absolutely.
anything for that not to happen.
Yeah.
So in terms of, the work and the summit, looking at our relationships and what they're doing to us is
Yeah.
really important.
And they have a real impact on how far we can go. Never forget, and I'm conscious of your time today, but I never forget standing in Tesco's car park in Boreham Wood, putting something in my boot, and a lady coming up to me said, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, of course you can." She's like, "Because you look trustworthy." And I'm thinking, why? Like a random woman from nowhere. And she said, well, my boyfriend, he says that, I don't think I'll never make anything of myself and that nobody will ever want me. And that, sometimes he'll tell me that she was going for an interview and that, oh, why is she working? She did. And I was just like, okay, leave him. Like it was just like he is, and you could see the fragility, literally physically see her fragility, and the fact that she approached somebody, a random person, never seen me before, in a car park, was just you could almost go, like when we talk about being, I'm full. She was beyond full. She just needed somebody to say you're not crazy, what your gut feeling about this is right. And it was like, and I remember saying to her, do you live with him? And she said no. And I'm like, great, because if you don't, it's so much harder if you live with somebody to
Sure.
leave. How do getting out? And it was like, great, well then this is not. And I ended up spending quite a bit of time with her, and I'm not saying that, for me, I'm just saying this is a real example of, you talked about people dripping. Sometimes they are
Explode.
so
She
full,
exploded.
they explode. She exploded on a random woman in a car park. And I think that the more that we can recognize, educate ourselves, seek to understand, and you could really see that what he had been doing is just eroding that brilliance, eroding her confidence. That she couldn't even think, she was going for a job interview, but wasn't sure if anybody would ever want to hire her. And he had told her, nobody will want you. So then she was like, no, he said nobody will want me. And I'm like, almost 8 billion people in the world, and nobody will want you. And so it's like, but it becomes, if you hear it enough, it's practice, right? If you hear it enough, it becomes part of who you are, part of your belief system. So my very last question for you is, again, another one I ask everybody. And that is, what makes you brilliant?
That's a hard question. I'm sure that people always kind of come and
It's only
say,
as hard as
that is
you make
hard.
it, Pamela. It's only as hard as you make it.
I I think I am brilliant because I have followed this pathway of doing what I love, and I can't see myself not doing this, right? Helping people, helping women, trying to get this message. I don't know, I will never know how many people, because of a campaign or education piece, we have helped to figure out maybe in that moment that that's what they needed to do. So I think that, yes, that making sure that my personal talents for maybe creativity and innovation and talking to people actually we put at the service of others. I think that makes me brilliant.
I love that. You don't think you know. You know. Okay. I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for sharing. The great news is that No More are going to be at the Brilliant Summit, and so they will have a space. If you do have any questions or queries, you can go and have a conversation. In the show notes, I'm going to put where to find you. So very quickly, where do we find No More and all of this information? Pamela, if you can just let us know. How do we find you?
Please visit nomore.org. simply like that. You'll find resources, toolkits if you're a corporation to download. You'll find links to the global directory. You'll find, all the information there, and you can follow us in, all the kind of main platforms. It's usually no more.org.
Love that. Pamela, it has been wonderful having you here. Always a great conversation. Thank you so much for your knowledge, your wisdom, and your passion. And thank you for being brilliant. We appreciate you.
Thank you for all your support always and being a champion.
That's my pleasure. Have a great day, and we will see you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Brilliance Summit Podcast. We've been honoured with such amazing guests. So, if you've loved what you've heard, gained from it, or enjoyed it, please share the Brilliance Summit with women you know in leadership and emerging leadership so that they too can benefit from the content and the wisdom of our guests. We look forward to seeing you at the Brilliance Summit this year.